Okay, so we are live now. Very good evening to all of you. Uh, Myself, Dipro. Today, I will be hosting the session. Uh, Welcome to the third session of our lecture series, What is Marxism? Introductory lectures. Today's topic is Marxist philosophy, Hegel, dialectical materialism, and overdetermination. This is basically a continuation of the previous lecture, uh, the previous session. So, without wasting any time, I will request Pranab to begin. Over to you, Pranab.
Thank you, Dipro. I see Professor Pradeep Basu is not here, but as I had promised, he had asked two questions. I will take them up, and also there was another gentleman who sent a question by mail. So we'll first discuss those questions emanating from the previous lecture, and then we'll go on to today's lecture, which is, as Dipro said, it is really part two of Marxist philosophy. Basically, we are discussing very briefly Hegel's methodology, then what is diamat, that also very briefly. And today we had started our discussion on the thesis on Feuerbach, Marx's thesis on Feuerbach. The objective is to understand the distance of Marxist philosophy from both Hegelian method as well as from mechanical, what he calls mechanical materialism, or the old materialism. Now, the first question that Professor Pradeep Basu had raised was, why should the relations of production be considered as theses and forces of production as antitheses? That's the way I put it. And he was suggesting why should they not be the other way around? Now, you see, very briefly, theses can be variously defined. It's basically a theoretical proposition that starts a logical sequence of statements. Now, it is the beginning of a discussion. It is, or sometimes it is said, it is the normal way of looking at things, whereas the antithesis is the opposite. It is the contradiction. It is a different way of looking at things. And we are joining a discussion. Antithesis really joins a debate by discussion by contradicting the initial position. Now, I proposed the relations of production as the thesis in the sense that the temporarily stable order is defined by the relations of production. Now, we had said that we had been examining that statement of Marx that when in the Communist Manifesto, that at a point of development of the forces of production, the relations act as fetters, and then they have to be burst asunder. They are burst asunder. Now, we are saying that, so the mode of production persists. It is for a period of time, it is temporarily stable, and during that period of time, the order is defined by the relations of production. Now, there is no antithesis during that period of time. The forces are in consonance with the relations of production. One may artificially construct a temporal sequence, though this is not the mode of Hegel's argument. In that event, the relations and the consonant forces precede the incompatible, more progressive forces of production. That is, initially they are both compatible, then the forces of production, they move forward. How do they move forward? There must obviously be a class which takes it forward, who are the bearers of the nascent new relations. They take it forward, and at a point there is a contradiction. The forces of production then are constrained by the relations of production, and then, as Marx said, they are burst asunder. Now, it is only in a revolutionary situation that the development of forces contradicts the existing relations of production. They challenge it, they become contradictory or unusual. You said antithesis is unusual. In this sense, I see the forces as the antithesis. It is not the relations that are contradicting the forces. They are harmonious up to a point. It is then the development of the forces that is challenging the relations. Relations act as fetters, they constrain, they limit. They do not contradict and overcome or change the forces. The forces contradict and initiate a change or a new synthesis. Now, the second question which Professor Pradeep Basu had posed was, does the transition from a slave, from a primitive communist mode to a slave, how does this transition from a primitive communist mode to a slave mode of production occur? And does this not contradict the implication was, of course, whether it contradicts Diamat or not. Now, I had said, I had mentioned the previous in answer to this that largely the transition from from a community mode of production or primitive communist mode of production to a slave mode of production is the result of a clash of two tribes, two separate tribes who have internally a primitive communist mode of production within them. So, in that sense, is this the reason lies outside the existing relations of production. Now, then, does this not contradict Diamat? I do not think it does. It does in a way and it does not in a major way. It does because, of course, it's the reason for its collapse is external. It does not because, you see, the primitive communist mode of production is not characterized by any class division. So unless there is a class division, there is no, as such, the question of relations acting as fetters to the forces of production. And so there is no possibility of a new class, a nascent ruling class, bearing a more progressive set of forces of production. So in that sense, it does not contradict what Diamat says. Then there are two questions which are posed by Mr. P.S. Mukherjee. This was sent over mail. One is, what is the basis of Hegel's conception of totality or absolute knowledge? Now, as we are not discussing Hegel per se, we will answer this very briefly. Every step of synthesis or negation of negation, that is two different ways of looking at the triad, the end point of the triad, synthesis or negation of negation, sublimates the prior moments. That is, they absorb without leaving any remnant. The prior moments, meaning the thesis and antithesis, are both contained completely in the synthesis. Property, for example, absorbs both free will and pure externality. This is the example we discussed in our last lecture, that the first proposition is pure, is free will. Then the antithesis is this is pure free will, and the antithesis is pure externality. And the synthesis is, I put my will into the external world and make it my property. So once this synthesis is arrived at, both my free will and pure externality become simply moments. They are absolutely absorbed in property. Property is the only expression of both free will and pure externality. In that sense, it is the universal with respect to the previous moments. But it is an incomplete universal as it has an antithesis. My property, your property, we discussed this. When in the journey of an idea, say free will, the absolute or the notion of the substance has been attained, there is no further antithesis. All potential will have been absorbed. Now, this is the absolute. This is what is called totality or absolute knowledge. Of course, just to no, I think we'll leave it at that. Now, the other question that Mr. Mukherjee has posed is at what exact point in particular Marx actually differed with Hegel, in spite of agreement per se with Hegel's dialectical phenomena. First of all, I think it's not properly worded. Dialectic is not a phenomena, it is a method. Now, our position is that Marx distances himself fundamentally from Hegelian dialectics. Now, this we discussed in the context of his critique of dialectical materialism. He did not know, he had not coined the word dialectical materialism, of course. We'll recapitulate that. Dialectical materialism as the philosophy of Marx, that of course uses the method of Hegel, but we suggest that Marx does not use the method of Hegel, he uses rather the method which is called overdetermination. Now, that we are not saying that using Hegelian dialectics as a method of Marx, this is not a possible reading of Marx. It is definitely a possible reading of Marx, but we do not choose this reading because it does not give any choice of action, and so it is, and so for meaningful politics. We'll discuss this presently. Now, let us move on to to today's lecture. Now, we will begin by recapitulating in some detail what we had discussed in our previous lecture. Now, that is because as I was going through it, I felt that this lecture was the points made were too pithily made, too briefly made, so probably it will be better to rehash what we had said. Now, the orthodox reading of Marx, called Diamat or Dialectical Materialism, was popularized by Lenin and later Stalin. And one can, of course, quote passages from Marx, as we had seen, that would support this essentialist materialism. We are saying essentialist because it uses the method of Hegel, and it is essentialist because it thinks that there is a single motor of history, which is the forces of production. This uses the triadic logical system of Hegel, but replaces spirit or self-consciousness as essential motor of history. This was what was suggested by Hegel. This is replaced with the forces of production. Now, this is what is the interpretation of the metaphor inversion of Hegel. Now, inversion of Hegel is a metaphor which is used in various places to qualify the method, the philosophy of Marx, and it is most vividly elaborated in the 1873 afterwards to the to volume 1 of Capital. Now, Diamat and Hegelian logic are two sides of a coin, as Althusser says, having the same affectivity on political practice and analysis. That is, really it doesn't at all have a place for political practice as such because it believes in a fated course of history. We do not favor Diamat's interpretation of Marxist philosophy primarily because of three reasons. There are other reasons also. Three reasons. One, it cannot explain the complexity of pulls and pressures of a society. It uses a kind of base superstructure logic, that is the economic base, the classes, they define our every action. This is a base superstructure model where, for example, why am I interested in taking a series of lectures on Marxism? Why are you interested in listening to a lecture on Marxism? Now, there are various reasons. None of these are, maybe sometimes there are class reasons, but largely there are other reasons, our personal history, how we grew up, what were the influences that we imbibed in the process of growing up, what were our experiences. Some of us were involved in some kind of political activity. This generated an interest, and so on and so forth. So it is a very complex set of reasons. There are pulls and pressures which really determine our actions. But this is denied. This is one of the reasons that we do not accept, we do not subscribe to Diamat. Secondly, makes the course of history determinate with little ground for political action, as history follows a logical sequence of modes of production. So it's a fated journey from primitive communism to slavery to feudalism to capitalism and then to socialism and then communism. So if it is this fated journey, then why do we have to mobilize? Why does one have to uh, engage in political activity, engage in putting together a lot of people to realize certain political objectives? And third reason why we do not subscribe to the Diamet interpretation of Marxism is that it breeds faith in Marxism as science and so truth. It therefore suppresses politics at the root of the decision to subscribe to the Marxist worldview. Now, Diamet claims that it is Marxism is a science. You see, a science based on a structured logic, the logic of Hegel, and that is why I don't know, I don't think you have seen these posters on walls, but once upon a time, our walls used to carry these posters, as we mentioned in our previous lecture, that Marxism is a science and hence it is truth. Now, so if it is truth, then there is no reason. I have not chosen, then I would say that I have not chosen to talk about Marxism. You have not chosen to listen to a lecture about Marxism or a series of lectures on Marxism because it is science. So because you want to know the truth, therefore we are interested in this. It is nothing short of, there is no political decision. You're not taking a political decisions. But in fact, this entire thing is a political decision. And as we will argue when we elaborate, Marx was entry point to the discussion, his class position. Why was he making this kind of inquiry, this kind of framework of analysis? It is because, among other things, because of his involvement in the working class movement and his experience of that. We subscribe to a different interpretation of the inversion of Hegel, captured by the concept of overdetermination popularized by Louis Althusser. Overdetermination critiques all essential determinations of social systems and phenomena and instead introduces the idea of mutual constitution of elements. Thus, instead of matter replacing spirit as the essential determinant of history, matter and spirit become mutually constituted. This we had seen in our course, in the course of the discussion. We had discussed 4 or 5 theses of Feuerbach, and there we had seen that what he's saying is that it is not matter and spirit are not separated, as Feuerbach is saying. Neither is matter produced by thought, as Hegel is stating, but they are mutually interdependent, and the bridge is that of practice. Generally, everything determines everything. There are pulls and pushes generating contradictions. This churning results in ever-changing mind and matter. We will discuss this in greater detail in our next lecture. We argue this through reading of Marx's thesis on Feuerbach. Now, Marx presented the nature of mechanical, we are still recapitulating, Marx presented the nature of mechanical materialism through his reading of Feuerbach's The Essence of Christianity. And in the process, he critiqued both mechanical materialism and idealism. Marx also outlined his own idea of materialism through this critique. Feuerbach argued that through human history, religion has progressed. Now, I'm quoting from Feuerbach. This is from Feuerbach's Essence of Christianity. The identity of the subject and predicate is clearly evidenced by the progressive development of religion, which is identical with the progressive development of human culture. The identity of subject and predicate is clearly evidenced by the progressive development of religion. Now, subject here is God and predicate is his nature. This is evidenced through the progressive development of religion through the Greek God. These are the examples he gives: Jehovah, that is the God of the Jews, and Christ. Through the stages of progress of religion, Feuerbach argues, the separation of mind and matter become evident. The absolute separation of the realms of thought and matter, which Feuerbach argues occurs in Christianity, is identified by Marx as the foundation of mechanical materialism. Now, Feuerbach says that it is in Christianity that mind and matter are completely separated. Now, the quote from Feuerbach, again from The Essence of Christianity: the Christian religion distinguishes inward moral purity from external physical purity. The Israelites identified the two. The Israelite trusted himself to do nothing except what was commanded by God. He was without will even in external things. The authority of religion extended even to his food. The Christian religion, on the other hand, in all these external things made man dependent on himself, that is, placed in man what the Israelite placed out of himself in God. So we have in our Eastern religions, whether you take Islam or you take Hinduism, we have what can you eat, things like that. So he's saying that this is also there in Judaism, saying that these are the earthly things. These are the religion was not so developed at that point of time. So all these things were taken into account. The religion, religious dictates, there were religious dictates dictating what you could eat and what you could wear and what you could do even. Now that is what is being done today. We are going through that the state is taking over this responsibility of saying all these things. Of course, in the because of the state no longer is politically emancipated. We'll discuss this later. Now, in Christianity, these two are separated. Now, recollect what was said in the first thesis on Feuerbach. I'm quoting, hence, in the essence of Christianity, he that is Feuerbach, regards the theoretical attitude as the only genuinely human attitude, while practice is conceived and fixed only in its dirty Judaical manifestation. That is, in Christianity, the mind and matter are separated. He regards the theoretical attitude as the only. Feuerbach thinks that this is the only correct attitude. When you've separated the mind and matter, you're thinking only in your mind. And the dirty Judaical practice, that is doing material things, is conceived and fixed only in its dirty Judaical manifestation. Dirty means of the earth, Judaical in the Jewish, as we discussed. So according to Feuerbach, religiosity has distilled itself in Christianity. It presents its foundational defect clearly when it has distilled itself in Christianity. That is, in the realm of thought, man separates from himself. In Christianity, thought and matter have been separated, and now you can think what religion is. You see it purely in thought. In the realm of thought, man separates from himself his essence, that is, his necessary goodness, as opposed to the contingent weaknesses or frailties of human projects, of human beings, which are the results of individuals' force of circumstances. And then he projects this essence into the clouds and creates God. That is human essence, what is essential to man. Now, we all have frailties, we all have weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. Why? Because, for example, in what was my previous, where I used to teach previously, there are a lot of things going on which teachers may protest. Now, should protest would be my view, but they are not protesting. Why? Because they are facing a contingent situation, a particular situation, where if they protest, they are afraid that they may be sacked. or they may be suspended. So we show our frailties. This is a lack of bravery. We show our frailties because we are each faced with certain circumstances. The force of circumstances forces us to display certain frailties. Whereas if we consider, if we leave aside these frailties, then we have the essence of humanity. That's what Feuerbach is saying. And then all these goodness in us, we think that this is the essence of humanity, and we project it into the heavens and make God. But of course, we are not aware of this, that we are doing this. He projects his essence into the clouds and creates God. Now, I'm quoting from Feuerbach. This is not, of course, from the Essence of Christianity. This is from the Essence Lectures on the Essence of Religion. God did not, as the Bible says, make man in his image. On the contrary, man, as I have shown in the Essence of Christianity, made God in his image. And then man, this is what Feuerbach is saying, I close quote. And then man goes on to argue, as the Bible says, I'm quoting from Genesis 1, God created man in his own image. So man creates God in his own image, and then he imagines that God is creating man in his image. This is what is called God fetish by Marx, and this is carried over. This is used again to elaborate the idea of commodity fetish. We'll discuss that in a later lecture. Feuerbach, according to Feuerbach, the separation and mind and matter which occurs in Christianity also shows up the mistake of idealism, which argues that matter is derived from mind. Marx criticizes Feuerbach for analyzing religion as an alienation and projection of the genus or essence of man. The genus or essence that Feuerbach talks about is not unchanging but determined by location and time. You have Greek essence, you have Jewish essence, you have Christian essence, but it is purely abstract because real society is divided along various lines, making all talk of essence of man as such within any social order only a myth, which is also produced by a particular society, the bourgeois society. You see, there cannot be any essence of man. You have the worker who is defined variously, but primarily by his class position. Then and of course he will be defined by other pulls and pressures. Maybe in a certain context religion will become more important, but whatever. So you have various divisions. You have gender division, you have within the family, you have the divisions, etc., etc. So humanity is divided into so many segments, and each segment is again, I belong to this segment, I belong to that segment. So my identity itself is also not clear. So where is the essence of man? This is what Marx criticizes, that Feuerbach, that there cannot be any idea of an essence of man. And in fact, the idea that there is an essence of man, that there is a common man, this is itself the product of bourgeois society. We'll come to this later in the context of discussing the further thesis on Feuerbach. Marx says that it is because Feuerbach failed to see the interdependence of the material and the thought worlds that he attributed the myth of religion to the realm of pure thought, projection of essence of man derived in thought alone into the clouds, and then to attribute the power of creation to this product of man's thought, which is God fetish. So he says that Feuerbach failed to see that it is the interdependence of material world and the thought world which has created this myth of religion and the God fetish. It is not, there is no essence of man which we alienate, which we take out of ourselves and throw into the clouds and make God. The very idea of essence of man is a product of a particular class divided society, the bourgeois society. It is intimately linked to the social order rather than being a product of thought distilled by the progress of religion to Christianity. So why is it a product of bourgeois order? This idea of the essence of man, we will see presently. Okay. So I don't exactly recollect, but I think we had discussed up to thesis 5. But anyway, I'm repeating thesis 5. Feuerbach, not satisfied with abstract thinking, wants contemplation, but he does not conceive sensuousness as practical human sensuous activity. Not satisfied with abstract thinking. Abstract thinking is the separation of thought and matter, as Feuerbach had argued, occurs in the course of the development of religion. He wants contemplation, that he wants us to think about matter. But that is the mechanical materialism, that the matter is given, thought just reflects matter, contemplates. But he does not conceive sensuousness as practical human sensuous activity. Human sensuous, this hyphenated, this is saying the same thing from a different angle. Marx rejects the idea of contemplation of reality given as such and proposes sense perception in a two-way relation between mind and matter. Human sensuous activity. In fact, we use these words to indicate separate analytical realms, that is thought and matter. We use these words that are only mutually and continuously constructed. You see, we think what to do about practical activity. We try to realize our thought, our plans in action. Then the real world impinges, we change our plans. So mind and matter are continuously interacting with one another and defining and redefining themselves. So in fact, we use these words to indicate separate analytical realms, mind and matter, that are only mutually and continuously constructed, not given as such and forever. See, this is what he's saying: human sensuous activity as practical human sensuous practice is the bridge between mind and matter. Feuerbach moved ahead of idealism or abstract thinking, but he did not understand the active or mutually constituting relations between mind as sensuous activity and matter. Now, let us move on to thesis 6. The part in bold, that in larger type, that is what Feuerbach's thesis, Marx's thesis on Feuerbach is, and the rest is my comment. Feuerbach resolves the religious essence. Feuerbach resolves the religious essence into the human essence, but the human essence is no abstraction inherent in each single individual. In its reality, it is the ensemble of the social relations. Feuerbach, who does not enter upon a criticism of this real essence, is consequently compelled to abstract from the historical process and to fix the religious sentiment as something by itself, and to presuppose an abstract, isolated human individual. Essence, therefore, can be comprehended only as genus, as an internal dumb generality which naturally unites many individuals. Now, Feuerbach relates the root of religion, that is its essence, in something that is essential to all human nature. This is because it does not go behind, that is, critically examine the roots of so-called human essence. Feuerbach could think of a human essence because his thinking was a product of bourgeois society, that is what we are saying, of bourgeois society, which breeds the myth of undifferentiated individuals interacting with one another in civil society. This is the myth of the isolated individual, which in classical political economy becomes the economic man, the Homo economicus. Marx criticizes the idea of a genus, whereas society is actually fractured along various lines, the focal fracture being, in Marx's view, along class lines. That is, there is no, as we were saying, there is no so-called essence of humanity. You see, there's no genus. Now, where does Foucault get this idea of an essence? Humanity is actually fractured, as we are saying, along religious lines, along cultural lines, along linguistic lines, along gender, etc., etc., among which, in Marx's view, the most important fracture was along class lines. This, from class lines we start analyzing everything. In that sense, it is the most important fracture. Now, these divisions show the existence of any single human essence at any juncture of history. There is no single essence. We are divided into so many parts. We are torn, we are pulled and pushed in, and then we have to somehow integrate ourselves. We will discuss this when in our last lecture. The genus, which does not exist in reality, is imagined as internal self-consciousness. It is dumb. He says that, Marx says that essence therefore can be comprehended only as genus, as an internal dumb generality, which naturally unites the many individuals. It is dumb because it is inert, incapable of generating any change. Because why? Because it lacks contradiction. All men are the same. So unless there's contradiction, like say thesis and antithesis is one way of looking at contradictions. Unless if everyone is agreement, then there will be no change. We'll be static where we were. So this is dumb because all men are considered the same. There is the essence of humanity. That it naturally unites individuals and civil society is a myth of bourgeois society, which is elaborated in discussion of thesis 9. We will come to that. It's an internal dumb generality which naturally unites. It is supposed to be the nature which unites all individuals. We'll come to that in more detail in thesis 9. Now, the next thesis, Feuerbach consequently does not see that the religious sentiment is itself a social product. Religious sentiment that is generated from the human essence and projected, etc., is itself a social product, and that the abstract individual whom he analyzes belongs to a particular form of society. Because Feuerbach takes away the social aspect of individuals, he comes to the conclusion that religious sentiment is just the product of essential human nature. He cannot see that the very idea of humanity itself differs between different divisions of society. That is, the worker will see humanity in one way, the capitalist will see humanity in another way. The worker who is steeped in Hindutva will see humanity in one way. The worker who is steeped in fundamentalist Islam will see humanity in another way, and so on and so forth. You cannot see that the very idea of humanity differs between different divisions of society. He cannot see that the idea of the abstract individual is itself rooted in the bourgeois society, that is, in economic man. Feuerbach does not see that the abstract individual belongs to a particular form of society in the sense of particularly fractured society, fractured by class primarily, but also by other identities. In that sense, the emphasis on the impossibility of the myth of the abstract individual. That is, actually there cannot be any essence. Once we take the criticism of Feuerbach that Marx is voicing, when we understand this, we see that there cannot really be any essence of man. There cannot be an abstract individual. This is also the critique of the very idea of human essence in any social order. But it is only in this particular social order that we think that there can be a human essence. Now, thesis 8, all social life is essentially practical. All mysteries which lead theory to mysticism find their rational solution in human practice and in the comprehension of this practice. Practice. Now, this is we were talking about this in our previous lecture also, that you think, you put your plans into practice and see the limitations that your plans face, the limits put by the natural world, by reality. So then you replan, etc. So this is practice, and through this you gain knowledge. This clarifies the difference between the genus of man as individual and real man in society that Marx talks about in thesis 6 and 7, and its relation to religion. Man in society is constituted by his relation with others that are all practical, that is, based on conceptions rooted in practice, the field of mutual constitution of thought and reality through their interaction in productive activity. Man is constituted by the many practical divisions in society interacting with one another and with the physical world through practice. So, in the course of putting our plans into action, in the course of productive activity, man enters into relation with one another. And through this, he gains knowledge both of himself and of the real world, and the reality and mind. They are interacting with one another through practice. So all social life is essentially practical. All mysteries which lead theory to mysticism find their rational solution in human practice. This is the common belief. Mysteries are caused by supernatural, unintelligible existence. So whenever we cannot, this is always happened in human history, that you had magic and God, and you personified the natural force of nature, which you could not understand. Mysteries are caused by supernatural, unintelligible existence. This is the common belief. This belief is the basis of mysticism. To understand the rational roots of such mysteries, one must examine through practice. One must examine through practice and its comprehension, that is, hypothesizing, testing, modifying hypothesis, the mutual constitution between mind and matter. This belief, to understand the rational roots of such mysteries, why these are mysterious to us, we must hypothesize, test our hypothesis. That is what Marx is saying, that through activity our thought must be continuously improved, and matter and thought will be interacting, and through this we gain knowledge. So this is a totally different kind of knowledge apparatus he's talking about, as compared to the rational knowledge apparatus of Hegel. So only through this we understand that we gradually, these mysteries fall apart. For example, just in alchemy, to give an example, gave way to chemistry. Ancient scrolls documenting the practice of alchemy combine magical incantations that must accompany the addition of a chemical to another in a chemical change. So alchemy discovered a lot of things, but it also added these magical incantations to with the practices which resulted in combining certain compounds with one another. Rational development of science brought the realization that the incantations were unnecessary. See, this is a practice which we see in there is nothing called Hinduism, basically in Brahmanism. We see that when you are performing this, what is that? Yagna. So you throw incense, mire, etc., to the fire, and you keep making incantations, and then the fire bursts up like that. So this is bursting up because of these, because it's a natural reaction. But you are making these incantations. It has remained like that. This was at one point of time. This was because we could not understand these mysteries. So we were thinking a natural phenomena was discovered, but we thought that this was not natural. When in the course of discovering certain incantations, certain mantras were recited, and one thought that, well, this is the reason for that. So now, as through the interaction between mind and matter, through practice, we gain more knowledge, then these fall apart. Now, the next thesis says the highest point is reached. The highest point reached by contemplative materialism, that is, materialism which does not comprehend sensuousness as practical activity, is contemplation of single individuals and of civil society. Now, this is a very pithy thesis which captures a lot of things. Contemplative materialism, this is elsewhere called mechanical materialism or the materialism of Feuerbach, did not think of human beings in society constituted as a whole through their various practical interactions, but thought of humans as individuals with a given genus or essence. Thus, society comprises sum total of like individuals who, as isolated abstract individuals, could only interact as abstract bearers of citizens' rights in civil society. This totality supposedly interacted, as liberal theory proposed, in civil society composed of undifferentiated citizens interacting outside the government sphere. Now, as later on Gramsci was to say, that he divided society into two parts. One, which he called the political society, which comprises really the what we know today as the governmental apparatus. Now, it's the state's apparatus, and the rest was civil society. And in civil society, outside the government apparatus of law and order, policing, etc., people interacted. Now, what Marx is saying is that the highest point is reached by contemplative materialism, that is, materialism which does not comprehend sensuousness, that is Feuerbach's mechanism, is contemplation of single individuals and of civil society. So it is in this bourgeois society that the highest point is reached. We think because individuals are formally defined as all equal citizens, bearing all equal rights, citizens' rights. So then it breeds the myth that we are all interacting with one another in civil society that is outside the realm of the state, in markets, say, as equal individuals. So single individuals interacting in civil society. Elsewhere, Marx makes a more detailed criticism of the passive contemplation of civil society by mechanical materialism, that is Feuerbach materialism, say, that results in the construction of egoistic man as natural man. Now, this part I'm quoting from on the Jewish question. The rights of man appears as natural rights because conscious activity is concentrated on the political act, that is political emancipation. Egoistic man is the passive result of the dissolved society, a result that is simply found in existence, and that is simply found in existence, and an object of immediate certainty, therefore a natural object. Now, we will discuss this later, that Marx talks about various kinds of emancipation and what emancipation does he emphasize on. Now, among these various kinds of emancipations, one important emancipation is what he calls political emancipation. That is emancipation from privileges. That basically what was there in feudal society. It was a society based on privileges. As we discussed in a previous lecture, in a previous lecture, that the feudal lord could extract surplus because he was privileged over the people who were producing surplus. They're not so in this order. So emancipation from privileges, this is what Marx calls political emancipation. Now, because conscious activity is concentrated on the political act, that is political emancipation. So once this political emancipation takes place, the society that results, that is the bourgeois society. And what is the bourgeois society? It's composed of individuals who are not designated by name in the constitution. We all have equal rights. So we have the rights of man, the rights of citizens, and this is confused as natural rights. It says that, well, we are all equal. This is the end of history. You have a famous book by someone called Fukuyama. This is the end of history. This is the end of civilization. There's nowhere to go because we are all equal now. So these are natural rights. So long it was unnatural. There were privileges, various kinds of privileges, slave, feudal, whatever. Now all these have been abolished. So now it appears as natural rights. Contemplations of individuals and single individuals and of civil society. And civil society, it appears to be the natural space of interaction of natural rights bearers. Now, thesis 10, the standpoint of old materialism is civil society. The standpoint of new is human society or social humanity. Again, this is a very pithy statement which needs a lot of elaboration. Standpoint of old materialism, that is the materialism of Feuerbach. That is civil society. It thinks that, well, once political emancipation has occurred, once we are all equal, interacting with one another as equal citizens in civil society, this is the end of history. So this is a standpoint. This is where we want to go. The standpoint of the new materialism is human society or social humanity. This is what will be reached when we have communism. So when all the various kinds of emancipations, some of which Marx had not imagined, he did not think of, say, gender emancipation, for example. So is human society or social humanity? Now, this is absolutely correct. Social humanity, where you have all kinds of emancipation. We don't have to take only the type of emancipations that Marx talked about, because so many other issues have emerged after the time of Marx. Now, standpoint of old materialism is civil society. Civil society is the sum of individuals with undifferentiated citizens, defined by the genus or essence. This is the civil society, sum of individuals. This is just the addition. There's nothing further. This was the conception of totality on which was based the analysis of society by Feuerbach's materialism. Human essence. Human essence comes from civil society. This was also the concept at the base of the liberal idea of civil society. All individuals were the same, citizens bearing undifferentiated rights. The only interaction that could be conceived in civil society were those based on those rights, those equal rights. Complex, mutually constitutive relations between concrete individuals and society. Social humanity was Marx's dialectical materialism's point of view. In Marx's conception of materialism, the abolition of privileges enshrined in constitution of the state, of communal identity or property, this is what he is talking of, political emancipation. In Marx's concept of materialism, the abolition of privileges enshrined in the constitution of the state does not result in total emancipations, which he calls human emancipation. Of course, there are various emancipations, as we mentioned, which he does not think about even, but all these would belong to human emancipation. He is discussed in detail on the Jewish question. To mechanical or old materialism, the best society is civil society, which results from the abolition of privileges that are obvious or evident through passive contemplation of then existing society. So you look at the feudal society, you see that, of course, there are privileged, there are people who are privileged, people who are who do not have any rights, who are not privileged. So this is very obvious. Then if you abolish these privileges, then you have the end of society. Such contemplation, you are just contemplating reality. Such contemplation is unable to critique material society through active practical criticism, to understand that when political emancipation has been autonomously carried to its limit through the secular state based on unrestricted suffrage, the material deformities exist with all force in civil society. This I'm actually paraphrasing what he says on the Jewish question. That when you look at the deformities in under feudal system, you see that there are privileges. So these privileges are abolished. You have political emancipation, and then you think that, well, this is the end of society. That is a secular state based on unrestricted suffrage. But within this state, what happens? The privileges that were there in political society are now carried over to civil society. So you have the workers producing surplus value, which is appropriated by the capitalist. So all the deformities that existed within political society are now pushed on to civil society, where you are acting as if you are all equal. No one is mentioned by name in the constitution. You're just allowed to carry on your trade in the market with whatever resources you have. And there you find that some people can extract surplus while others are bound to produce that surplus. While Marx's materialism comprehends that human emancipation resulting in human society should be the proper standpoint or yardstick of criticism of social order, this can result only from total emancipation. So Marx was not looking at the surface. Elsewhere, where he critiques classical political economy, he calls it vulgar economics. You're looking at the surface, you're looking only at the market. But if you go down, deep down, you go to production. And there you see that if you give all these rights, equal suffrage, unrestricted suffrage, everyone has one person, one vote. And it's a secular state. There's no religious differentiation either. So, but even there, you will find that exploitation, the haves and have-nots, the poor and the rich, all this will continue. Why? Because if you look deep down, if you look at production, you will see that where is the seed of this of these privileges is not in the written order, but so that political emancipation can abolish them. The last thesis, I think, also needs a lot of elaboration. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. I think that by change, Marx is not talking only of change of the entirety of the social structure, which is we call revolution, which Marxists refer to as revolution. He's referring also to activity through which both mind and matter are changed, as he already discussed in thesis 1 and 2. This is the practical critical activity referred to in thesis 1. The world is conceived and changed through this activity. Symbiotically, knowledge develops. So philosophers have only interpreted the world. They've looked at the world, they've contemplated it in various ways. The point is to change it. And changing it is practice. And through practice, you learn. So that is so it is no longer philosophy in the old way. Now, Baliber, in his book, The Philosophy of Marx, puts it strongly. There is in reality no Marxist philosophy. What he means, in my understanding, is that there is no separation of the subject, the philosopher, and the object of knowledge, object of which knowledge is to be gained by the operation of epistemology. Epistemology is a theory of knowledge. So there is an object, you apply the theory of knowledge and you gain knowledge about that object. So this is not something which is there in Marx's way of looking at things, Marxist worldview. Thus the task is no longer thinking of the given object in a materialistic fashion or in an idealistic fashion. Subject, object, change, knowing, all mingle, breaking down the traditional Western philosophical barriers between ontology, that is how we are, what we are, epistemology, the theory of knowledge, and ethics, that is what is right and wrong. All these are churning continuously in overdetermined process. And that is why, probably why Baliber says there's in reality no Marxist philosophy as such. All this does not mean that Marx is talking only of thinking, because all are linked. Further, he opposes Feuerbach for thinking that the Holy Family will automatically cease to act as an arbiter of fate once people realize that it is a reification of the essence of man. Rather, the contradictions in the earthly family have to be dealt with through changing society. This we had seen in a previous. So, this is not the only change that he's talking about, practice, small practice, but also ultimately, even to abolish religion, you'll have to abolish the contradictions within society, the divisions, the focal division being that of the class division, because it is these divisions which are generating our alienation and which is creating our faith. We have to believe in something beyond us in order, that is a solace. So that is also another kind of change that it's talking about. So everything is linked together, your religion, your ethics, your knowledge gaining, and your striving for a different ontology, different being. Logic interpretation is not sufficient even for interpreting society. This has become obvious since postmodernism pointed out the hollowness of the idea of truth and fixed meaning. We are constantly making meaning of society through our own political choice. In this sense, interpretation itself is not just interpretation, but involves decisions regarding how we want to change the world. So when we talk of Marxism, when I lecture in Marxism, when you listen to a lecture in Marxism, when we read about Marxism, we are it is we are thinking about knowledge, we are trying to gain knowledge, but we are also, it's a political choice. It is because everything is overdetermined, there is no truth, so we have made this political choice that we want to know the world in a particular, if why, because for a particular kind of change. So all this is a political choice. So that is why it is the different kind of philosophy. In that sense, Marxism is, there is no Marxist philosophy as such. Now, I think I'll end there. There's no need of a summary. These are the references. So I will stop here, and I will take questions if there are any.
There are no questions in the chat box yet, so I will now open the forum so that anyone, if anyone has any question, they can ask directly to the speaker.
It doesn't appear as if anyone has a question.
Pranabda, just as anyone, no one has any question, so let me put one observation which can be discussed here, uh, because this is not a purely academic session. This is also a political session. So I want to put one observation to you that uh, we really need to think about politics. Really need to think about the political practice we are involved in. Actually, there is no way to domesticate politics, right? So I'm just putting it like this, so we can discuss it a little bit.
We need to think about politics, but you see, of course, everything determines everything else, as we say in this concept of theory of overdetermination. But also, analysis is important. And that is why we think about theory. So, for analysis, we have to enter, first of all, what we are structuring this series in this way, that we started first with the background in which Marx is writing. Then we are moving on to his philosophy, epistemology, etc. All these which are combined together, as we just now briefly mentioned. Now, through this, we will therefore leads to the question of, if everything determines everything else, then how do we look at the world? Where do I start from? Then becomes a political question, that why we start from class. Why are we starting from class? It's a political decision. It's a political decision which was based on Marx's engagement with the workers' movement. We will come to that later. And then the political, everything is a political question. You see, as I was saying, that why are we studying Marxism? Why are we reading about Marxism? This is a political question. Now, there are, of course, we commonly say what are political questions are really questions which we are related to power. That is what we normally identify as political questions, which are obviously related to power. Say a working class movement, a movement against the employer, a movement by the students against the authorities, or in a broader sense, even within the bourgeois democratic order, uh, movement by political parties to win in the ballot. That is a political decision. And then the largest decision will, of course, be changing the relations, which is a revolutionary movement. So all these are, of course, political. We will take up some of them, uh, but as I mentioned in the first lecture, that we will not be able to take up the questions of application in detail here. I am hoping that our group, or we can invite people from outside also, we can discuss the applications later on through such sessions We talk about the global polity. We talk about, of course, it is important, and I think there are ways in which Marxism. We will discuss this in our last lecture, last two lectures when we talk about new ideas, Gramsci, Laclau, etc. How these new phenomena of the emergence, re-emergence, and establishment of conservatism all over the world, and religious fundamentalism. Why is it occurring just now? It is possible, I think, but of course, we will have to do a lot more studies. Have I gone off tangentially, or was it what you were looking for?
No, no, it's absolutely fine, Pranab.
Okay, sure.
So if anyone else has any question, please feel free to ask the speaker.
Pranab,
Well,
uh, now I understand that student movement will be conceived as a political movement, but can it be conceived as a class movement?
no, it is not definitely a class movement. It is not definitely. It is a political movement, but it is not a class movement. There can be political movements which
Yeah.
are not class movements. Even say, I would say broadly that when we talk about elections, participating in elections, mm, supporting
Yeah.
different political parties, that is not generally, that is
Hmm.
not generally a class movement.
Exactly.
Pranab,
But
my
definitely, political, that is definitely a political movement. Nah? When we are engaging in this no vote to BJP, that was a political movement, but it definitely not a class movement.
So there may be politics outside class also in that sense from the Marxist
Yes, of course.
perspective.
Yes, yes, of course.
Okay. Okay.
Because politics is about power and class is about
Appreciation. Okay.
surplus appropriation. The two, they have intersections, but they also have a
Okay.
vast area where
Okay.
they don't intersect.
Pranab, in this regard, I have just one question. When students are rallying for some issue of the workers, uh, and plenty of examples are there.
Uh,
So, in that case, also, would you term that it is not a class movement? As
that is definitely a class movement. You see, we will come to this question in detail later on. It's a question of hegemony, as Marx says. I forget just now where he says this, but I think it's in German ideology. And it is much before Gramsci talked of hegemony. He's saying that ideas of the ruling class become the ideas of everybody. So that is cultural hegemony, and he's saying that in order for some class to strive to overthrow existing classes, first of all, its culture must establish its dominance. Nah? Now, so when the work, so so a single class cannot really launch a movement by itself because it is not a large. You see, when the bourgeoisie dislodged the feudal order, bourgeoisie mobilized whom they mobilized. They mobilized middle classes, they mobilized the serfs, etc., etc. So in the same way, it is the mobilization of the workers, which is a class mobilization, and which is rallying other people, other segments of the population. Whether you call them, you probably will not, student will not be called a class, but the other segments, yes.
in fact, in Russia also, during the
Yeah,
time of Bolshevik Revolution, we
definitely.
we we experienced a lot of those forces who rallied around the.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because in fact, that is where you see popularization of Gramsci's ideas in one way it explains on this question of hegemony. It explains some certain conundrums of Marxist revolutionary practice. Like, one never anticipated that revolution would come first to a backward country like Russia. One never anticipated that revolution, whatever happened later on, that is a separate question. I'm not going into that debate at all. Now, number one never anticipated it could come to a country like China. So all these could happen because of this mobilization of the majority. No?
Uh, I don't think anyone else has any question. So, okay, so we are meeting again in the next Friday at 8 p.m. So, till then, good night, everyone.
Thank you.